The terrifying charisma of John Wayne Gacy, unmasking a serial killer. In the 1970s, a series of brutal murders began to shock the nation. These crimes seemed almost unbelievable in their cruelty and cunning. Tonight, we delve into the chilling tale of one of America's most notorious serial killers. The 1970s were a time of cultural change and political upheaval in America, but beneath the surface of this transformative era, a sinister presence lurked. This presence moved silently, striking fear into the hearts of communities across multiple states. It all began in the suburbs of Chicago, where young men started to disappear without a trace. These men were bright, promising, and full of life. Their sudden disappearances left families and friends desperate for answers. Among the first to vanish was Timothy McCoy. In January 1972, 16-year-old Timothy was on his way home from a concert when he disappeared. His family was frantic, but there were no leads. The only clue was a small bloodstain found later at a construction site. As the months passed, more young men went missing under eerily similar circumstances. They were last seen in public places, often approached by a man who seemed friendly and harmless, a man who offered them a ride or a job. Law enforcement agencies across multiple states began to notice a disturbing pattern. The victims were all young men, often in their teens, and each disappearance was as perplexing as it was tragic. Investigators faced a terrifying reality. They were dealing with a predator who was not only intelligent but also incredibly deceptive. Witnesses reported seeing a man who was well liked in the community, often seen at social gatherings and charity events. Suspicion grew as more witnesses described this man. He was seen driving a distinctive car, a detail that would eventually become crucial in the investigation. In December 1978, a routine investigation into a missing boy named Robert Piest marked the beginning of a breakthrough. Robert was last seen leaving his workplace to meet a man about a job. When he didn't return, his parents reported him missing. The man's name was John Wayne Gacy. As investigators dug deeper into his background, a horrifying picture began to emerge. Gacy was not just a local contractor, he was a methodical and remorseless killer. Born on March 17, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois, John Wayne Gacy was raised in a strict household. Despite his troubled childhood, he appeared to lead a successful life. He was a respected businessman, a devoted volunteer, and even dressed as a clown to entertain children at parties. But beneath this facade, dark impulses were beginning to take shape. Plot Chapter 1: Timothy McCoy. Timothy McCoy, a 16-year-old high school student, vanished on January 2, 1972, after attending a concert. Gacy later confessed that he had lured Timothy into his home under the pretense of offering a ride. Once inside, Gacy attacked and stabbed him to death. This murder marked the beginning of Gacy's horrifying spree, with Timothy's remains discovered years later in the crawlspace beneath Gacy's house. Chapter 2: John Butkovich. John Butkovich, 17, worked for Gacy's construction business and disappeared on July 31, 1975, following a dispute over unpaid wages. Gacy invited him to his home under the guise of resolving the issue. Instead, he overpowered and strangled John, hiding his body in the crawlspace. Despite the suspicions of John's family, insufficient evidence at the time prevented any immediate action against Gacy. Chapter 3: Darrell Sampson. Darrell Sampson, an 18-year-old student, went missing on April 6, 1976, while walking home from school. Gacy later admitted to luring Darrell into his car, then taking him home and strangling him. Darrell's remains were found in the crawlspace, part of the gruesome collection of victims hidden beneath Gacy's house. Chapter 4: Randall Raffett and Samuel Stapleton. On May 14, 1976, two friends, 15-year-old Randall Raffett and 14-year-old Samuel Stapleton, disappeared while walking home from a park. Gacy later revealed that he had encountered the boys separately, offering each a ride. He took them to his home, where he strangled them. Their remains were also found in the crawlspace, adding to the growing number of Gacy's victims. Chapter 5: Michael Bonin. Michael Bonin, a 17-year-old high school student, disappeared on June 3, 1976. He had planned to catch a train to visit friends, but never arrived. Gacy confessed to abducting Michael and taking him back to his house, where he murdered him. Michael's remains were among those discovered in the crawlspace. Another tragic end for a young man full of promise. Chapter 6. William Carroll, 16, vanished on June 13, 1976. He was last seen leaving his home to visit a friend. Gacy later admitted to picking William up and taking him to his house, where he murdered him. William's remains were found in the crawlspace, adding to the grim tally of Gacy's victims. Chapter 7. David Talsma, 19, disappeared on December 9, 1977. He was on his way to meet friends but never showed up. Gacy later confessed to luring David into his car, then taking him home and killing him. David's remains were also found in the crawlspace, another tragic loss in a string of senseless murders. Chapter 8. Robert Piest, a 15-year-old high school student, was last seen on December 11, 1978. He told his mother he was going to meet a contractor about a job. When he didn't return, his parents called the police. Robert's disappearance led investigators to Gacy. A search warrant for Gacy's house revealed the horrific truth. Gacy had been systematically abducting, assaulting, and murdering young men and boys, burying many of them beneath his home. Chapter 9. Gregory Godzik, a 17-year-old high school student, disappeared on December 12, 1976. He had recently started working for Gacy's construction company. After finishing work for the day, he was last seen driving away, never to return home. Gacy later confessed to abducting Gregory and murdering him, burying his remains in the crawlspace. Chapter 10. John Isyak. Though John Setsail, a 19-year-old acquaintance of Gacy, went missing on January 20, 1977. He was lured to Gacy's house under the guise of discussing a business opportunity. Once inside, Gacy overpowered and killed him. John's car was found abandoned, and his remains were later discovered in the crawlspace. Chapter 11. John Prestige, a 20-year-old youth who was known for his kind nature, disappeared on March 15, 1977. He was last seen accepting a ride from a friendly man who turned out to be Gacy. John's remains were among those found beneath Gacy's house, adding to the ever-growing list of victims. Chapter 12. Matthew Bowman, a 19-year-old who was looking for work, went missing on July 5, 1977. Gacy, posing as a potential employer, lured Matthew to his house. There, he overpowered and murdered him. Matthew's remains were later found in the crawlspace, another young life tragically cut short. Chapter 13. Robert Gilroy, 18, disappeared on September 15, 1977. He was last seen outside his home, planning to meet friends. Gacy, who was known to patrol the area, lured Robert into his car and took him home, where he murdered him. Robert's remains were found in the crawlspace, adding to the chilling tally of victims. Chapter 14. John Mowry, a 19-year-old Marine, vanished on September 25, 1977. He was last seen leaving his apartment to meet friends. Gacy, who often preyed on young men in vulnerable situations, lured John into his car. Once at Gacy's home, John was overpowered and killed. His remains were later discovered in the crawlspace. Chapter 15. Russell Nelson, a 21-year-old architecture student, disappeared on October 17, 1977. He was last seen leaving a bar. Gacy lured him into his car with promises of work. At Gacy's house, Russell was murdered and his body concealed in the crawlspace, adding to the mounting horror beneath Gacy's home. Chapter 16. Robert Winch, 16, vanished on November 10, 1977. He was last seen hitchhiking. Gacy, known for picking up young hitchhikers, offered Robert a ride. Once at Gacy's home, Robert was overpowered and killed. His remains were found in the crawlspace, another victim of Gacy's monstrous spree. Chapter 17. Tommy Bowling, a 20-year-old who had recently moved to Chicago, disappeared on November 18, 1977. He was last seen leaving a bar. Gacy lured Tommy to his house, where he was murdered. Tommy's remains were found in the crawlspace, a tragic end to his hopes of starting a new life in the city. Chapter 18. David Daniel, David Daniel, 21, vanished on December 30th, 1977. He was last seen leaving a party. Gacy lured him into his car, offering a ride home. Instead, David was taken to Gacy's house and murdered. His remains were later found in the crawl space, another young life cut short by Gacy's brutality. Chapter 19. William Kindred. William Kindred, 19, disappeared on February 16, 1978. He was last seen leaving a bar. Gacy offered him a ride, taking him to his house. There, William was overpowered and killed. His remains were discovered in the crawl space, adding to the ever-growing list of Gacy's victims. Chapter 20. Timothy O'Rourke. Timothy O'Rourke, 20, vanished on June 15, 1978. He was last seen leaving a nightclub. Gacy, who often preyed on young men leaving bars and clubs, lured Timothy to his home. There, he was murdered. Timothy's remains were found in the crawl space, another victim of Gacy's horrific crimes. Chapter 21. Frank Landigan. Frank Landigan, 19, disappeared on November 4th, 1978. He was last seen leaving his job. Gacy, posing as a potential employer, offered Frank a ride. Instead, he took him to his house and killed him. Frank's remains were found in the crawl space, another young man lost to Gacy's insatiable cruelty. Chapter 22. James Mazzara. James Mazzara, 20, vanished on November 24th, 1978. He was last seen leaving a bar. Gacy, always on the lookout for potential victims, offered James a ride. Once at Gacy's house, James was overpowered and killed. His remains were later found in the crawl space, a tragic end to a promising young life. Discovery. As investigators searched Gacy's house, they uncovered the remains of 29 victims buried in the crawl space and other parts of the property. The grisly discovery shocked the nation and brought an end to Gacy's reign of terror. Gacy was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. His trial became a media sensation as the full extent of his crimes was revealed. The trial and execution. Gacy's trial began in February 1980. Representing himself, Gacy attempted to manipulate the courtroom with his charm and intelligence, but the overwhelming evidence sealed his fate. He was convicted of 33 murders and sentenced to death. On May 10, 1994, Gacy was executed by lethal injection. His death marked the end of one of the most terrifying chapters in American criminal history. The legacy. John Wayne Gacy's legacy is one of fear and revulsion. His ability to disguise his true nature behind a mask of normalcy and charm continues to haunt the collective memory. His story serves as a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind the most unassuming facades. Today, the tale of John Wayne Gacy stands as a stark warning. It's a story of the devastating impact one person can have on so many lives, and a reminder of the importance of vigilance and justice in the face of unimaginable evil.